So, being a DID system is really difficult, not only because of it coming from childhood abuse and repeated childhood trauma that oftentimes doesn't end in childhood. Just because the disability comes from childhood trauma and childhood abuse doesn't mean that abuse or that trauma ended in childhood. And in my case, as a DID system, the abuse that I was undergoing, the trauma that I was undergoing, it may have started when I was a small child, but it didn't end until the primary abuser of my life was no longer in my life. And even after that abuser left my life, because they chose to remove themselves and remove me from their life, which I am very thankful for, they chose to disown me. Even after that, there was other things that have been very traumatic for me. Not nearly on the level of trauma as that person, but I've been through a lot even since they disowned me. And today is the anniversary of when I was disowned. September 16th, 2022 is the date I was disowned by my primary abuser, who in my case was my father, and who I truly, genuinely believe is the reason I have dissociative identity disorder. I was diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder about a year after he disowned me through a text. I was also diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress, the same day. And I was told that it is because of my childhood and my childhood trauma and the abuse that I went through in childhood by a childhood trauma specialist and therapist who has known me since I was 12 years old and been in my life off and on since I was 12 years old. And I will also say that this doctor is the one doctor who actually helped me, that I was taken to see by my abuser, because unfortunately all my healthcare, everything growing up was through my abuser. And the one doctor whose care actually did help me was not any of the psychiatrists I was taken to, who just put me on a cocktail of various different medications for over 10 years, from childhood up until my early 20s, and I had no say in the matter. It was forced upon me because they believed I was schizoaffective. I don't think I am schizoaffective. I understand that I have symptoms as a DID system, as someone with multiple personalities, that overlap with what people think of as a schizoaffective. I understand that there is actually an overlap in symptoms between my autism and my DID and schizophrenia and schizoaffective disabilities. This is why they're very frequently misdiagnosed for each other, or at least I lived 10 years of my life, at least, under a false diagnosis that unfortunately I think is still on my record, but I know it is a false diagnosis. I know in my heart of hearts it is not true. That is not actually what I have. And I know that for me, the more recent diagnoses that I've had between the ages of 18 to 23 is when I've been diagnosed with what I actually have. Right? And I think that the hardest part of living with DID now, that I've actually worked through enough of my trauma to be stable, that I've worked through enough of my trauma and I've put in the fucking work to be as balanced as I can be as a DID system, as someone who is multiple minds, one body, one brain, one body, is that this disability, just as much as my autism, actually I think even more so than my autism, bars me from every facet of public life. It literally bars me from every fucking facet of normal public life. And I love who I am. I love myself despite my disabilities. I love myself, and I taught myself that. And I taught myself how to love myself and how to love myself, disabilities and all. But it is an undeniable fact for me that my DID bars me from any semblance of normalcy, and just as much as my autism does, if not even more so. Because normal society doesn't take very kindly to you saying that you're a collection of demons in a human body because you live with a disability where your brain and your sense of self is fragmented, and the way that you had to survive and cope as a child with repeated childhood abuse was to separate yourself out into different people. And when those people reconnected in your 20s and became aware of each other as the dissociative amnesic barriers broke down, you are left with, in my case, feeling that I am a collective of spiritual beings in a human body. This is actually a documented way that for some DID systems it can present. Some DID systems have alternate personalities based on beloved characters. Some DID systems have alternate personalities based on spirits. This is a thing with this disability. That's why it's so frequently confused for possession. That's why it overlaps with possession, is because people with this disability can have alters headmates, parts of their brain that identify and see themselves as spirits or as ghosts or as things beyond the person's physical humanity. What today's terminology you might call otherkin. But this is very common in people with dissociative disabilities. And it's really, really frustrating knowing that I was tortured in such a way as a child up until, because it didn't end when I was a child, up until the age of 22. And I can't work, not only because of my autistic brain, but also because in order to maintain any form of work or any form of schooling, I have to mask as one mind, one body. And I am physically incapable of being one mind, one body, how 90% of the rest of society is. I am not one mind, one body. So to have any sort of like public interaction with people, I have to pretend to be one mind, one body. I have to mask and pretend that I'm just one person to survive in a society that directly works against people with my disabilities brain. I can't work as an unmasked DID system. I can't maintain schooling as an unmasked DID system. I can barely maintain relationships. I can barely maintain a roof over my head with this disability. And it's so frustrating to now have the language and love myself and support myself and be as healed as I feel I can be in a lot of these areas. But because my father chose to beat me as a child, spank me as a child, emotionally invalidate me throughout my entire life, be emotionally incestuous of me, allow other people to be fucking actually sexually abusive of me, and to also himself reinforce sexual abusive behaviors over me or grooming behaviors over me because of what my father chose to do to me for 22 fucking years. I now have this disability that I have to live the rest of my life with because I didn't have a father who could just be a fucking father to me. And I don't fucking care if he was to my siblings. He wasn't to me, and he proved that to me. And the day before he disowned me, September 16th, 2022, I told him exactly what my problem with him was. I told him exactly, verbatim, like my biggest issues with him. And he denied all of it, said I traumatized myself, that I was just rewriting history, that he didn't do anything. And then he lied to me. He lied to my fucking face multiple times. He said, I never encouraged you to be a girl in any way when he raised me as his daughter. How can you tell your oldest son, who you raised as your daughter, who comes out to you as transgender, how can you tell that child, that adult child, I never encouraged you to be a girl in any way, when you raised me as your daughter? What the fuck do you mean you didn't encourage me to be a girl in any way? One of the things I brought up was, despite my high IQ, I needed to have been in special ed. I should have been in special ed. I know that I was misdiagnosed growing up with a disability I don't feel I have. I know, though, I should have been in special ed. That's what I needed emotionally, even though part of the reason I wasn't put in special ed is because I was more intelligent, frankly, than able-bodied peers around me, able-minded peers around me. So they expected me to do more. They expected me to perform at a higher level. The problem is that in doing that, I was directly working against my autistic brain. I was directly working against my traumatized brain as a traumatized child who was already dealing with shit. And I should have been in special ed. And I told him that. And he told me, you were in special ed. You're rewriting history. You were put in special ed. I wasn't put in special ed. I wasn't fucking in special ed. I had an IEP. I was never in a specific classroom for disabled people. So I don't fucking care what people who don't live with my disability think about my disability, first off. Second off, I also additionally don't care what people who have my disability think of me if they're gonna fucking start an issue with me or harass me or put me down for having the same disability as them. Because I've also seen that. That's literally just internalized self-hatred projected onto me. If you see someone in a group putting down other people in the same fucking group as them, they are trying to appeal to capitalism and to the hierarchies in place that place us beneath people who don't have our disability. And I see it. I recognize it it's very obvious to me. And a lot of times when someone is very traumatized, they might enable the society and the people and the able-minded people who traumatized them to begin with, and they might enable their systemic oppressors and put others like them down. It is a symptom of their trauma. That doesn't make it okay. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't mean I'm gonna fucking put up with that. But I don't fucking care what people who don't live with DID think about DID systems. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't fucking care what people who are DID systems think of me if they're just gonna be fucking harassing me for publicly existing and not hiding and not masking my disabilities. I switched to Eli. Max was here earlier. And one of the things about being Eli is I am actually, as an alter, specifically designed to be able to mask as Max so that people can't tell us apart. And the reason for that is because Max, growing up, needed to be separate from the trauma memories. And so in order to keep him safe as a child, we had to hold on to the trauma memories for him, and different ones for different ones of us. And my job was to be his mask, both the mask of his autism and the mask of his DID. And that's why I'm so similar to Max. As well as being, I feel, a combination of Max and our other headmate, Lewis, and both me, Eli, and Lewis used to be persecutors, or self-destructive parts of our brain, before we became our system's defenders. And now we are actually not only defenders of our system or our brain, we are also now our co-hosts. We are co-hosts of the system. I do actually think I was a co-host before for part of our teens, possibly, but me and Lewis used to be persecutors. So I'm gonna read this letter now, right? Because it's the anniversary of when I was disowned today. And this is something my therapist told me to do, my current therapist. I no longer see the therapist that I saw between the ages of like 12 to 20 something, because I can't afford her, unfortunately. I don't have the right health care to continue to see her. I actually paid out of pocket, I believe, for the sessions I did where I was treated and diagnosed with DID and with PTSD. From repeated childhood abuse. I paid out of pocket for that because I don't have the right insurance. Anyways, my current therapist told me to write a letter to my dad in our last session, and I think I'm going to share that in this video with you. Letter to my dad, my therapist told me to write in response to him disowning me. Love doesn't look like making your wife and oldest son actively suicidal, then telling both they did that to themselves because you're so physically incapable of any scrap of accountability towards the people you've harmed. The closest thing I ever got to an apology from you was, and I'm sorry you feel that way. Loving a kid doesn't involve spanking or grooming or yelling at them. If my hatred was the only thing that ever got you to listen to me for once, then I'll go on hating you until you're dead. Love doesn't lead to chronic lifelong disabilities. Love doesn't include lying to my face when I tell you exactly why I wrote that song. Love isn't conditional on conformity. Love doesn't result in DID from childhood CPTSD or repeated trauma you blamed me for and said I did to myself. That was never love. You never loved me. You never needed me. I love myself where you did not. I protect myself because you never did. And I hope my new father and husband, Satan, consumes you alive from the inside. So that's venting my feelings. And, it's interesting that my therapist told me to do that because we actually did, after he disowned us about a year after, and after being diagnosed with DID, we did send him a letter. It was through email because that was the only any form of thing we hadn't blocked him on was email. And at the time we were suffering from PTSD and other things with our DID that made us struggle to speak and struggle with our speech and typing at that time because we were really going through some things. And we said some things in that email that we don't agree with anymore. That was really just kind of a reflection of where we were at when we wrote it. But the reason that Lewis wrote that and the reason that Lewis sent that email to our dad was to prove to themselves that they are no longer afraid of him. As one of the alters, that is a combination of littles or child personalities of our system that aged up. Lewis is a combination of two littles aged up that became an adult personality. And as someone who carries a lot of the childhood abuse for the system, they needed to prove to themselves that they're not afraid of our dad anymore as a personality. And that's the only reason we sent that letter, was to prove to ourselves that we're not afraid of him. And it worked. We proved to ourselves we're not afraid of him. Yeah, we broke no contact to do that, but it was for our peace of mind, not his. And our current therapist telling us actually to essentially do the same thing we did before, write out a letter. Obviously, we're not going to fucking send this one because we've remained no contact. It's interesting that our therapist told us to do that. They didn't tell us to make this video. We're just choosing to, as a system, make this video. But the one good thing my father ever did for me was stop being my father, was to let me go, because that was the one thing that forced me to truly become independent of his abuse and influence, to truly stop giving a shit, was him proving to me that he didn't give a shit about me.